You know what? I'm gonna be honest. So, from last 2 days, I've been trying to write the code, which like on the Sunday there was class, and I did the class, and then I was like, all right, we learned about DOM, document, somehow related to managing documents and the communication between an HTML file and JavaScript file, and it just makes you able to manipulate HTML with whatever you are writing in JavaScript, whatever kind of logic functions and all that kind of stuff, which is cool because now you could do stuff instead of just rendering non-dynamic pages which don't do much except display information, right? Great stuff. Like it's like building block of you trying to create a interactable front end, an interactable interface for your backend or for your applications, which is important, which is nice, and I want to learn that. But since I have been not been able to write a single line of code, I don't know why. I don't know. It's just I haven't been able to. Well, normal circumstances, I would say, fuck you, car horn. Fuck, what the Okay, we are gonna ignore that. I'm gonna ignore that. You guys can't even hear it. But, yeah, I mean, I've been trying. I haven't got anywhere with it. The thing is, I wanna know why, or rather, like, why not? Like, do I not wanna do it? Do I wanna delay it? Do I have more important things to do? Um, do I not understand what I'm doing? Quite possibly, but if I don't continuously do it and try to even like approach it from a perspective where I'm at least trying to understand it, then I will understand it eventually. And but I'm not even approaching it, right? So what the fuck, right? Like there isn't a problem. The problem is just not doing. And now we can get into that trap of oh, you are just procrastinating, bro. As usual, and you're just all that shit. Okay, but no, I'm not. See, uh, I that's weird logic, right? To me, it's a weird logic. Procrastination. I'm gonna procrastinate on the more than half of the things in my life. If you take the traditional definition of procrastination, that is trying to delay the work, but you eventually do the work. In the meantime, you are doing something else, something that's more important or pleasurable to you. But let's just say, let's remove the pleasure because we should get pleasure from the things that we wanna do, and the sole purpose of my presence on this fucking earth is to get freedom, and freedom isn't the pleasure, but it should be related to it in sense that if I'm doing something, I'm working towards freedom, or I'm doing with the uh I'm so free to do that thing, and hence there should be pleasure in it. Got it? So from speaking from that perspective, I can't comprehend what I'm saying, but I'm trying to say something. Fuck. Yeah, fuck this vibe. But yeah, so why not? Like, it's not procrastination, not the traditional procrastination. Like, sure, but I just don't want to do the work. I'm watching content all day. I'm looking for the next content, then I am looking for something because I surf my YouTube page all day. What I'm looking for. What answer do I want? Or rather, what question do I even have that I should look for their answers? I don't even know the questions that I'm looking answers to, and maybe I'm not looking at answers, I'm just looking at my next question. So, what the fuck is going on there? Right. And I'm not going at why is it there. It could be a million different things. Why is it there? I'm saying if it is there, what is it? So, what? None of that matters, right? None of that has any meaning. Well, oh man. Oh, it's scary. Anyway, there is a great video by Jonathan Blow. He's a programmer, I guess. I mean, he's some significant person. I'm sorry, I don't know. But it's just, he's a guy. He has a YouTube channel. He might be something out more beyond that. And oh yeah, he's a video game program code creator or, yeah. Let's not get into it, specifics of it, because I'm bad at it. You can Google it. Uh, the video title is Talk, cause it's a talk. He's giving a talk to us, and it's about video games and future of education. Sounds tempting, and because, well, I'm not coding or anything, not writing anything, doing anything, because I don't want to pursue it at this point, like, or maybe I will. Maybe we just spew up some ideas and I get motivated to write some code, maybe, or we will just watch that video, at least some parts of it, not the whole video. It's a 2 hours and 50 minutes talk, which I am not ready to watch. My attention span could never. Okay, fuck that. I'm just gonna watch the parts that are relevant to me. uh I've had coffee, so I might be a little erratic at the moment, but I am usually a little more calm. Yeah. On 25th, Christmas, that was yesterday, my gym was apparently closed. And I would just, today, when I go into the gym, I will like, how many Christians do work out with me? Amen to the Lord, brother. You know, like, why do you have to close it? Come on. One day gone. It was Monday. I could have worked out. Fuck you. I could have worked out at home too, but that's not the point. Um, let's watch the video. You guys won't be able to hear the video because, well, fuck it. What if I get copyright? Maybe channel will be off. What does that matter? Nobody watches it anyway. So might as well get copyrights. Hey.
At the beginning of the game, when there are a lot of players alive, but most of them are poorly armed, this
Uh-oh.
particular kind of strategy or behavior might be beneficial for me to engage in. But in the late game, when there are many fewer players, but the playfield has contracted and everybody is very well supplied, I want to behave in this other kind of way, right? And start building up this knowledge of this game through iteration after iteration after iteration, right? And it's a little bit like practicing science or some kind of empirical philosophy, because you get to form your own ideas about what's a good idea to do, and then you get to empirically validate those ideas, right? So you might say, hey, in the mid game, if I'm in an open area, I want to try to do the following thing when the zone closes. Let me try that. Oh, maybe it didn't work this time, but maybe part of observing the space over and over is realizing that there's a random element, like there are in games like poker or something like that, and to realize when you got dealt a bad hand. So you might say, well, I'm going to keep trying that strategy, and maybe after I tried it 15 or 16 times, I'm going to see generally what's true about what was beneficial and what wasn't beneficial, and then I'm going to draw some conclusions, and that is how you
Wow, that's an interesting take. Well, it's obvious No, not obvious take. Maybe interesting take is just the right way to say it. What he's trying to say is, well, it's obvious because you guys are not dumb. Whatever you said, you understand. Whoever is watching this or whoever is not watching this, whatever. But what I understand from it is, basically, while you are trying to play, let's just say, open playground. No, a multiplayer game like a Fortnite or like PUBG, battleground games. Yeah, sorry, I forgot the name. It's been a long time. Um, you can validate your strategies and you can try to find what is affecting and how it's working, and you can mm, bring up some hypotheses around what you're trying to do, to what you will do, how you will try to play, and then you can empirically validate it. And like you can just validate what works, what doesn't work. So that's like a great way to learn things. Interesting. Obvious take for some
Become a
people.
better player, and games are trying to make you a better player because they're trying
I'm
to score more
stupid.
victory condition,
Might not be
right?
obvious to me.
Okay. Now, the thing about this is the amount of time that you can spend playing and the number of repetitions lets you see a much more complex shape of what is the behavior of the system of
Deep
the game than
expertise.
we
Let's
normally have
go.
been able to get in the past. Even in the time of
Hmm.
Pac-Man, the system of Pac-Man is much simpler than the system of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. And so, as we've been building these more complex games, we've been giving people the ability to explore these more complex systems more directly, right? And well, this kind of revisiting a situation over and over from different angles and in different contexts is normally the kind of learning that people get from life experience and that we consider to be very valuable, right? So if you want to learn how to farm from some guy who's been farming from decades and he's trying to convey his knowledge to you, he might say a lot of things that are hard to understand in the beginning, like, look, if you get up in the morning and the weather is this particular way, go do this thing. But if the weather is like slightly different in a way that seems kind of the same to a beginner, that means something totally different, and go do this other thing right away because that's critical, right? And it might sound nonsensical to you or just illogical or inconsistent or too hard to understand, but what actually happens is experts build very detailed models of these highly nonlinear state spaces that contain surprises, right? That contain sharp turns, that contain, what I mean by a surprise is, well, maybe there's a low probability event that can be very significant if it happens, or maybe there's a very nonlinear response where you do a particular action and usually the system responds in a particular way, but once in a while it responds in this totally other way, right? These are the things that we learn over time by engaging and re-engaging with systems. And so because of this, I say that all games are educational, right? Pac-Man, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, even regular old educational games, right? But we don't think of most video games as educational, and the reason is because they don't tend to have real-world applicability in the way that we want educational games to have today when we say it's educational, right?
Whoa. Yes, that's true. Um, like let's just say the ladder example that the previous example that we took about the game PUBG, the battleground game where you are like how do you like really apply that to the real life? It's not obvious in the moment, but it's you're gonna use probably the same kind of thing while you are learning something, like a concept of something, right? um, we're gonna learn something and we're gonna try it, and we're gonna basically build an abstraction in our brain how it's working, and then we're gonna say, okay, this is not working, we are gonna approach it from this and these ways. Might work, might not work, we get success, whatever. Like that's the way to go about the things. But isn't it everywhere? Like it's not that obvious kind of learning, or maybe I'm just not understanding what he's trying to say. What is what is empirically validation even mean? I can't even pronounce it, so I don't know what it means. Maybe I know, but I highly doubt it. Um,
Because they don't tend to have real-world applicability in the
okay. Mm, 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 mm. Empirically validate them. Okay, so it's basically practically validating them. Wow, nice, great, learn something. You could have just written practically, but maybe empirically is just a nice. It's the right thing to use. I have no idea. I wouldn't know. So
or victory condition, right?
um,
Okay. Now, the thing about this
we
is
are here.
of those
We were
conclusions
here.
mean
No, no, not here. Definitely, we were
that
somewhere
somehow
here.
you're empirically validating things for that particular universe, but the validity, just like when you're playing a game,
Oh, come on.
does not survive if you map it onto the real. Seems similar in some ways to the real world, and this is actually both a barrier to making educational games, but also an opportunity. All right, so if you map it onto the real world, even if that toy universe of the perspective in PUBG. And that's why on this slide I put empirically validate in sarcasm quotes, because you're empirically validating things for that particular universe, but the validity of those conclusions may not and probably does not survive if you map it onto the real world, even if that toy universe of the game seems similar in some ways to the real world. And this is actually both a barrier to making educational games, but also an opportunity.
No, so he concluded that it doesn't like entirely map it in a way that it's very useful in the real world. So um, that's a limitation of how games of that particular form, structure, and system works. But it's also a opportunity because it just nobody has created it. You can create it. Maybe that's why it's an opportunity. Maybe just putting it maybe in the quotes, because why would you do such things? You are making a game to sell to the people, not making a game to teach them things. When we have ever made games to teach anything, and all the tries that have been there to make games to teach people have been done half-heartedly, and you know they are poor tries for the most part. Like, you can't trick my brain to learn something while you are trying to make a game to teach me to learn that thing which you are teaching in a game. My brain will know that it's a game and it's having a concept, and if I don't want to learn about it, whatever. Like, schools approach this, right? They have probably some kind of software which they used to teach some certain concepts, and oftentimes it's a very poor implementation and it doesn't work. Like, a teacher who has great understanding of the concept would rather explain it in a much viable way than that game or whatever the school system use, which is very poor imitations of that. So it's not done in a way, or at least I have noticed that um that it serves its purpose very fully. Interesting. Huh. Let's see what he has to say. But before that, I'm gonna go and take water, take a piss, and come back, and we're gonna continue this. All right.
All right, so back when I started working on this game, Braid, I hadn't developed this line of thought about non-linguistic communication, but I was open to it. I was very interested in just seeing what video games can be like when you experiment with them, and what makes them better and what makes them worse. And I wanted this game to be as good as possible, right? Just like when you're playing a game, the fact that you want to do well causes you to learn things, right? When you're making something, if you want it to be the best thing that it can be, that causes you to learn things. And so as I was working on the game, I learned that somehow the levels got better the simpler they were. This is a puzzle game, right? And the ideas behind the puzzles would come through the game more clearly when the levels were relatively stark, when they didn't have a lot of details that were irrelevant to the puzzle idea, when they didn't have a lot of extra challenges, like little monsters that you had to get out of the way of in order to do the puzzle. The game works the best when it's pure and there's just a particular situation and that's very simply described on the screen, and you're just like, what is this? And you have to figure it out. And so over the course of the game's development, the designs of the levels iterated from more complex level geometry and more interactive elements toward the design that we see in the game today. And this actually took a little bit of willingness to be untraditional, because usually if you're designing a game, you're very concerned with people being entertained by your game, and entertainment means challenge. It means throwing a bunch of stuff at the player. It means giving the player a lot of things to grab their attention. And in this game, it was like, actually, no, we want less things grabbing the player's attention, because many of those things are distractions, and distractions reduce the clarity of transmission of the ideas of the level. That's how I thought about it by the end of development. I didn't have those ideas that clearly in the beginning. So when I started working on the design of this game, The Witness, I was very interested in this way of communication that I had seen in Braid, and said, I want to make one of the top agenda points of this game to explore this method of communication and see what we can do with it. In this game, you wander around this island that you see here, and it's full of puzzles, and a lot of the puzzles look like these LCD screen things that are in the environment. And you walk up and you can trace lines on them. Here in this picture, we see these puzzles in a solved state. But normally you would walk up to this row of panels, and just the left one would be lit, and the rest of them would be unlit, and you solve it, and it lights up the next one, right? And when you come up to this first panel, the game doesn't tell you anything about what to do. It doesn't say, hey, these black and white rounded rectangles mean a particular thing. It just lets you interact with it and figure that stuff out. And so when you try to solve this puzzle, there's really only three things you can do. You can go at the top, the middle, or around the bottom. And the middle one is right. And as soon as you solve this first panel, a magical moment of non-linguistic communication happens that I'm still fascinated by and still want to understand as best as I can, because it's not just that you gain a logical fact that this particular path on this particular puzzle resulted in a solution state of true, right? That is not the only thing that happens, because the layout of this puzzle, right, the way that it's formatted, tells you something. It's not really a definite thing, but it's like, oh, there's something about the symmetry of where the line is, right? And the spots being, polar opposite colors. Something about that is suggestive. And as the player, you don't exactly know what any of that means, but we managed to build upon it, right? And so in the second puzzle, it's saying an idea that adds on to the first one. It's saying also, by the way, you don't necessarily have to start in the middle and go straight between. You can start in one corner and go to the other corner. And then the third puzzle here says, oh, there could be more than one spot on one side of this group that you're drawing your line around. And so the way that I think about the game is that every puzzle has an idea like this. Usually it's an idea that you could express in words, but that's not really the way the puzzles were designed. The puzzles were designed to be non-linguistic, right? And so something interesting happened, which is, if you go up to someone who's new to the game and is working on the last puzzle in the sequence, and you ask this person, like, hey, what are you trying to do right now to solve this puzzle? Often, not always, but often, they'll be like, and they'll start to try to explain it to you, and they won't know how to explain it, what they're doing. They'll start to say, well, I'm trying to draw this line between these things. They'll hesitate a lot and get facts out like, I think I need to go clockwise and not counterclockwise because of this, and I'm not sure what the blank spaces mean here, but I think I can do this or that with them. And it might take them a couple minutes, and then they can eventually coherently explain to you in full sentences, in normal human language, like exactly what they're trying to do. And that was fascinating to me when that started happening, because what that meant was that all that information was in their mind, but they didn't know how to put it into language, because it didn't go in via language, right? It went in simply through this interactive loop that you have, between the game and the player. Now, that doesn't happen with everybody, right? So some people, I'm not exactly sure what the percentages are. I didn't keep careful data about this, but some people will just be able to explain to you what they're doing. And I think the difference is that some people, when they're working on a problem, like reason to themselves about what they're trying to do and explain internally to themselves, like, I'm trying to blah, blah, blah. I mean, I do that when I'm trying to solve hard things sometimes. So I think, sometimes people pre-verbalize and do that work, but sometimes you can catch people before they've done that, and then they have to verbalize in the process of explaining to you. And so that was confirmation to me, if I needed it, which I didn't really, but that kind of experiment in this game was confirmation to me that games is its own medium. It's not just pictures and sound and controls. Why? Because we're able to get ideas into people's minds that didn't come through the pictures, that didn't come through the sound effects, that didn't come through, linear language, right? Is a different thing. And if we want to use games for education, we want to understand this thing and a few other things as well as we can, and see what its properties are and figure out how to use it the most effectively. So what is this thing, this way that we can communicate non-verbally, and how can we apply it, right? We should expect, again, just like some media are better at communicating some kinds of knowledge than other media, we should expect the same to be true with games. We should expect that there are some things that we can communicate non-verbally way better than other things try to communicate verbally or linguistically, right? But then we should also expect that games are not good at some things, right? Now, another thing that fascinates me about games, which you can see, again, in games like PUBG, is that players can gain competence without knowing specific facts. So there's a sense in which they learn in the opposite direction of how you would learn in school from books, right? So if I'm playing PUBG, so you might know in this game that the AK-47 does a lot of damage, right? It hits other players really hard, but it's hard to control the recoil, and it's hard to add things to it to mitigate the recoil, and so you maybe only want to use it in scenarios where you're not going to get in a super long distance engagement, right? But it could be much more effective than other things up close. But then you might know, oh, but the M4, it doesn't have nearly as much recoil. It fires at a higher rate of speed, and each individual round does less damage, but it's effective at longer range, and I can get more attachments for that, right? So these are all things that you know from playing PUBG for a while, but you don't actually know the numbers, right? You don't know how many points of damage an AK-47 does versus a player with level 3 armor or a player with level 2 armor versus what an M4 does in other of those cases as well. Like the actual invisible rule set of this game is very, very complicated if you take into account all the numbers. Like what are the numbers that actually control how much recoil happens when, and how well do players understand that? Almost no players understand that stuff very clearly, but they're able to deal with it, right? They're able to gain competence here. Now, if you were to learn this kind of stuff from books without doing it, you would have to go in the other direction. You would start out reading a book saying an AK-47 does this many points of damage at this range and this much at this range, and that's affected by armor in the following way, and recoil increases it, blah, 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 or decreases it. It would be just like the most boring math or physics class that you've ever been in, and it would take probably years of studying that material before you would get the kind of intuition that you can get much more naturally by playing a game like PUBG, right? We would much rather play it to get the experience than read the books to get that experience, and that's a clue. We can use that, right? We can use that to make education better. And so the general point I want to make is, of course, not just about shooting games. It's about anything. Any subject that takes a long time of instruction before you can get to a point of understanding and expertise where you have the actual intuition about that subject, right? Maybe you can get to the intuition much faster with games as opposed to having to assemble it piece by piece, page by page over time with text, right? We might be able to get to places in games much more easily than books can get to, or in fact, that books can't practically get to within the lifetimes of people. Now that said, as I've said a few times, games aren't going to be better at everything, right? Books are actually better, for example, at communicating precise facts, because again, the writing doesn't change over time. You can throw a ton of very precise numbers on a page, and people can go very easily flip to that page and read them. And even if you have a game that's pretending to be a book, you have to like boot up the game and get it into a particular interactive state. That's just different from like picking up a book and turning it to the page, or like taking a photo of the books, you have it on your phone conveniently. Like all of these things, they just work better for books, right? Now sometimes games do contain like bodies of knowledge like this inside the game, but I don't really consider them like that's a point at which games are kind of mimicking books as opposed to doing the things that are in the wheelhouse of the game itself, right? So when I talk about the special powers of games during this speech, I'm really talking about the things that games can do that other media cannot, right? And so you can kind of pretend to be a book, but I think it's substantially less good than an actual book, right? So just like the analogy of building a fire at the beginning of this talk, you actually want both of these things at once in one educational program, right? You don't want to replace all books with games, because games aren't good at everything, right? But you want games to be there, and in fact, I would say you want them to be there first. I think we're going to talk about this in a little while. We'll come back to it if I forgot. So now, of course, we have educational games today, not just entertainment games. There are lots of educational games. They're almost always completely terrible, right? Nobody really likes to play them if they don't have to. Why are they terrible? Well, there's lots of reasons, but I think the biggest reason is this failure to understand the different media, right? I'm gonna keep saying this. It bears like it's the key point in some way. Like taking this very seriously is one of the key points of this talk, right? Which is again, different media communicate different ways. They communicate different types of information or different types of knowledge or understanding with different levels of effectiveness, right? Depending on the flavor of the knowledge. And usually when somebody goes to make an educational game, they're taking something that we already teach with books, right, or in-person instruction, and they try to
This is what I was trying to tell, but like my words might not have been clear. What we try to teach from often the approach that we start with when we wanna do something or teach something, a concept, right, in a book. The approach is to take that book and try to turn that book into a game, into a something that should be different from the traditional way of doing it, the from books itself. But like the genesis, the the approach, we are already starting from the book. And a book is a medium. We have to understand, we have to create this distinction that book is a medium. Book is not what it's like book contains a concept. It is not the concept itself. So we can take the concept and leave the book behind, and we can start from the concept instead of the books. And that's that's the way to begin with it. It's not the way to implement it or anything. It's just the way to like approach it, right? Yeah. So I think I'm a little more clear about this, what I said just right now. um right. Because again, uh, book is bunch of text. Text is concept. The real thing is concept, not the book. Book is a medium that's like very traditional, readily available and useful. uh like it just is the best way to just get the information, but to learn it, to understand it. And by learning and understanding, I mean you knowing that concept intuitively, like you being able to use it and then transform it and use it across different disciplines, or some abstraction of that concept. That's like understanding, like you get it, and that's how you are able to do it, you know. So that that happens, that application doesn't ever reach there, or however far, but however we enforce it so much, we try to create something so good, but the genesis of the idea of was to never create it something that transfers the concept. The genesis of the whole thing was to, you know, take what's the book is and to convert, transform its form, but not communicate the essence of it, the real content and the concepts of it, you know. So it's like we are trying to take a book and we are trying to convert it into a gamified user experience where, you know, kids can learn these things, you know. No, fuck that, right? Like that approach is somewhat questionable. So because questionable, why? Cause it doesn't work so well. Why? Because I've been in class and I've seen those programs. Those are shit. Those were shit. Those are shit. And the if they will be made from the same approach, then they will continue to be, you know, rather old or new. They will continue to be shit. Um, yeah, that's it. Let's see.
Just embed that information in a game and then try to make the game more fun by having it be like an interactive way to get to that information. And that's actually fundamentally incorrect, right? You shouldn't do that. And the reason you shouldn't do that is because, again, the space of what you can easily understand or effectively or efficiently understand from books is different from the space of what you can effectively understand in games. If you want a book to be good, you make it, you try as best as you can to make it a good book, right? If you want a game to be good, you try as best as you can to make it a good game, which means you need to play in the area that games are good at, which is something that books don't really know anything about. So if you go to a book, or if you go to an educational program that was structured to be taught through books, that structure was iterated over time to be effective when taught through books, and you're trying to bring it to games, and it's a completely inappropriate structure, right? And so this is really why most educational games are bad. Is they're trying to take a book-shaped peg and fit it in a game-shaped hole, and you're just going to make a mess if you do that or break things. It doesn't work very well. Okay, now one of these things that we think, and I'm going to try to change your mind about this a little bit, but one of these things that we think almost implicitly about what it means to make an educational game is that you're trying to take specific information that we want to teach people and put it in the game, right? I'm stepping back one step from saying it's information that came from an existing educational program or from an existing book, and I'm just saying, well, you know, if you want to learn, uh, physics or something, here's a set of things that you need to know, right? But again, the thing about games is you need to stay in space where games are good. And being too on the nose about exactly what information you're trying to put into the game is dangerous. It can easily result in a bad game. And so if I were to go teach things, like for example, if I were to go teach programming in my own little private programming school, I wouldn't do it the way that high schools or universities in the US do it, certainly. I would start people out in a different way. I might give them a little bit of introductory material that's in book form, but after that I would start them on games like these games from Zachtronics, which anybody can download and play on the PC or maybe some other platforms. Here's one of my favorite games called Shenzhen.io, and in this game, it's sort of a puzzle game, but the puzzles are open-ended. It's more like how successfully do you accomplish these particular tasks. You're trying to build a circuit board in this fictional universe that accomplishes some particular task, and you can build the circuit board by laying down these chips and routing these lines between them and also making little assembly language programs on each chip. Now, this is not an educational game. These are not real chips. This is not a real assembly language. And in fact, that's actually part of why it's a fun game, is because it's not an educational game. The assembly language in this game is so limited in functionality that it's comical, right? It's kind of hilarious. And it's kind of hilarious how feeble these little circuits are, especially compared to what we have today, right? But that's kind of funny, and it's what makes the game fun, right? And the constrained problem space that's like cleaner than what you have in the real world makes it more fun to play around and experiment. But again, it's not a toy, it's goal-oriented. You're trying to achieve goals, and the fact that you're trying to achieve those goals makes you work hard, right? Especially after you've, supposedly solved a particular level, you've got something that does the job, but you're like, that was hard, and my solution is really ugly, and I could barely do it, and I just don't like what I did. And then you look on the scoreboard, and one of your friends has a way better score than you. Like his thing runs in way fewer cycles, or he used way fewer components, and you're like, how is that even possible, right? And then you go back and iterate on your thing, and you're like, I can make this improvement over here, and that's better. And then I can make this other improvement over here, and that's better. Oh, and because I did those two improvements in tandem, that opens up this possibility over here. And you see this way that you could rapidly iterate from something that's kind of terrible to something that's really good. And then at some point, you may say, wait a minute, now that I see this differently because my solution is different, I realize I could do this thing over here that actually makes those first three improvements completely unnecessary now because those components are gone, right? And that's the experience of playing a game like this. It's really fun and really interesting. Now, what are you learning, right? I've said that all games are educational. Well, you're learning this fake assembly language, fictional assembly language. You're learning this, simplified chip routing thing. But actually, I think the most important thing that you learn from this game is something that is very, very valuable, and that is the spirit of engineering and the spirit of programming and the spirit of problem solving on an engineering problem like this. And I think it is taught very, very effectively in these games, much more effectively, in fact, than in school, right? And so, there are people who graduate from the college where I went, which is a top computer science school in the U.S. There are people who graduate from there with a bachelor's degree who have no real concept of this true spirit of engineering that I'm talking about. Or in fact, people with PhDs don't even know. It's something that our educational system is not very good at teaching. But when you experience it in a game like this, you can bring that experience to the real world, right? You're not going to bring this assembly language to the real world. In fact, if you're working in assembly on a real chip, it's usually much more of a bummer because it's this giant, ugly, bloated, terrible thing, right? But after you do something with these systems that are very complicated and very hard to deal with, it might remind you, like, oh yeah, it's kind of like that time in Shenzhen IO when I did that really ugly thing. But I improved that drastically, and so maybe I can do that here, right? And even if you don't explicitly think that, our minds learn by example. They're good at forming new patterns based on the things that we've seen and the things that we've done that are successful. And so it can actually affect you at a very deep level and get you something that would be very hard to get, right, through a traditional computer science school. And so I think this is actually very valuable as an educational game in a way that is unacknowledged, right? It is unacknowledged because we're looking for the education in the wrong place. We're looking for the education in terms of knowing about specific circuits or specific programming language.
Yeah. So form, right? Form as in its essence, its structure, the thing itself. Like what is saying is this game doesn't actually teach you what exactly and specific circuit board and things are there in the real world, but it's an entirely abstraction based learning where you are trying to do it in a way where you don't get into specifics and it's all just fictional by the game, and it's all like mm, simplified, but you could like get value out of it eventually if you try to go to that route and learn actual chips and shit like that. And that is because our brain works on pattern. If it it's so interesting that even the abstractions can make our brain be like, okay, I recognize this thing which I don't have a name for, like, but I recognize it from this where, and maybe we can apply that here, maybe. And then you just try and tinker around, and maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, maybe you figure out some other way. But that's what learning entails. That's where it is. That's the root. That's the core of it.
When the actual education here is the deep spirit of engineering, right? And that's way more important. So here's another game by Zachtronics called Opus Magnum. I can show you just a little image of what this looks like when you successfully solve a problem. Where are we? Here we go. So, wait, there we go. So this game, it lets you output little animated images of your solutions so you can be proud of them after you've done them. And it's really nice. Like, this is a relatively efficient and clean solution that I came up with from what seemed like a very hard problem at first. This game, it's, the fiction behind it is that you're making these little nanomachines. It's in a world where alchemy, the rules of alchemy are governing these little tiny particles and not the rules of chemistry. And so obviously it is not trying to be too on the nose in terms of the things that it's teaching. It's just chemistry-ish, but you like kind of put atoms together and form bonds and break bonds, and again, solve problems in the spirit of engineering. But here the problems tend to be more spatial and about the sequence of what occupies space over time. And it's just really fascinating. Like, you also program the moves of these little manipulators, these little gray arms that you see moving back and forth. And it's probably a little bit better about education. Like, if I want to use this as an educational game, it's probably a little bit more about programming or general engineering than something like chemistry. But it can impart a little bit of understanding of chemistry, a little bit of motivation to think that chemistry is cool, right? If you spent 100 hours playing this game doing cool stuff, you probably have more appreciation for chemistry than if you never did anything in chemistry and then you show up in a boring class one day, right? And so if you start to think about what an educational system would be like if you had these little things all over the place that aren't all trying to do one specific thing, but it's like, oh, this is mostly programming, but there's a little bit of coolness vaguely about chemistry here. You can imagine the aggregate effect of all of these things being quite large in terms of the motivation of people to learn things, or of the amount of context, the amount of understanding that they have going in. All right. Last game from other people I want to show here is this game called Miegakure, which this one is not out yet. The previous games are out. You can go play them. This one is not out. Hopefully it'll be out sometime in the future. This is a puzzle game where you walk around these small puzzle worlds and you try to push blocks around and do things to manipulate objects in this space. But the trick is that the space is four-dimensional spatially, right, and not three-dimensional. And this isn't the weird thing that people like to cutely know about, where like, oh, time is the fourth dimension in Einsteinian space-time. That's not what this is. This is actually 4 dimensions of space, and you can only see 3 at a time. So I'm going to play the beginning of a video from that website to sort of show you the flavor of this game. This doesn't really show you problem solving in the game, but it shows you kind of what it's like to move around and shift dimensions.
Oh, that's cool.
Now, on the one hand, that is not very explicitly educational, because when are you going to need to know about manipulating 4 dimensions of space? But on the other hand, in terms of both the spirit of what you might be learning and just in terms of developing advanced skills, this is very advanced, and it can get you to a very senior level of ability very quickly, because you want to solve these puzzles in this space, and so you try hard to visualize this space that is 4-dimensional, right? Like if you're a high school math teacher and you manage to get a significant proportion of your students to be able to even try visualizing things in 4D or be enthusiastic about that, that has to be just like a rousing success in that context, right? But in games, we can do that very quickly, like almost immediately, and people enjoy it, right? Now, this isn't going to teach you like theorems about math in dimensions higher than 3, but it gives you the feel of it, and it gives you the experience of playing with it. It gives you both instinct for what kinds of things can happen in 4 dimensions, and it gives you inspiration because you had fun with it. It gives you motivation, let's say, right?
Yeah, and what he's saying is quite fucking important because, uh, look, as a person, as a human being, uh, my basic need is food, water, shelter, and at every level, for even the dumbest people, you know, relatively average human being. I'm sorry, not the dumbest, but relatively average human being. Everyone in some capacity fulfills those. Like there is a has to be something uh, that's very much different inside of you or your neurochemistry that you like your brain essentially that you might not fulfill those things ever in life, and we all get at that stage, and then when we get to that stage, we continuously repeat every whatever we are doing in life. So it's certainly a direction. Why I'm talking about this is because I want to say that money and the context of money and using money and society, uh, we all get to the stage where we earn money, we have food, and we have shelter. But a lot of people say that learning stops. Well, kind of no. I think learning goes on for people for a long time, but yes, learning does stop in a way that nobody's sitting down and learning hardcore things, right? So that that just stops towards the end of university if you figure your food, water, shelter thing, right? You get a job and that's it. And maybe if you want to progress, but like we get there pretty fast. Not pretty fast, it takes 20 year, fuck, that's not fast. But we get there and eventually everyone is there, and from there on the improvement and everything has to be driven by who you are, and who you are is what kind of things that you do. And well, I've been interested ever since the time I saw the Astro Boy thing, right? So, Astro Boy was an anime that used to come on television back in 2000s. So I watched that and I was like, that's cool. That fictional thing animation creates you could change things of your body. So basically, you could he had a and I didn't know at the time. I was thinking that what Astro Boy the story of Astro Boy is like the guy lost his child, and then he creates this robot that is like his child. And what I understood at the time as the story was that his child was saved, and then but like he wasn't able to move, so the guy helped his child to become a cyborg, and now he has this ability, superhuman ability. So he's exceptional and he could do more things than other people. That fascinated me because hey, it's still fascinating. Like, hey, you lost an arm, here is an arm. You lost a leg, here are the legs. You lost a brain? Well, you're dead. But that's such a fascinating thing. And I was like, whoa, dad, we will be able to do that in future, right? And I will, you know, I was talking stupidly and I quite remember it very much because it's such a deep memory for me. I don't know why or why when is that, but it's just a very deep memory for me that I remember saying to my father that we will be able to do that sometimes in future, and when we will be able to do that, maybe I could do it. Um, as a kid, it was just a fun thing to say and to think about. As an adult, it's still a fun thing to say and think about. Nothing changed, all right. Except that I think in great many ways, uh, as robotics improve, our default are the bodies that we have right now. Not at the moment, but in future, will be greatly limited by what they can do as the robotics, improve. Currently, it's kind of in a it has started to improve where it has, uh, improved in a way that in some years, say 3 to 4, it could come up to the works of human, normal, average human, and it could do those things without a fainted error. But yeah, it's questionable. Anyway, so that's just interesting thing, and all of that is happening because it's such an abstraction. Like, if you think, if I will have to say, hey, what is it that you would like to do for your entirety of life, I will just say somehow I will be able to try to figure out better way to learn things. And well, the best way is to do by doing the things itself that you're trying to learn. But I think I want more efficient way, a more direct way, or just a way that I can just something better than what currently is, because it's very hard to keep up anyway. uh and and why do you wanna, like, my sole purpose couldn't be like just I want to create something that is able to aid learning. I want that thing, I want to use that thing to aid my learning. To do what exactly? So then I would say I want all of that to aid me to further explore this idea of technology, human beings, and interfacing with robotics and directly as one. So pretty cyborg and sci-fi shit that I don't know what it is. And according to current standards, I'm a dumb guy. I'm not okay. So fuck that. Uh, According to current standards, the current, if you try to define what I am, is uh, pretty much a nobody. But so there is some level of enforcement, not of the environment I've been raised in, like everybody else. That if you if you take and make certain selections, like you do in game, you can't do other things, right? It's like a character lock. uh, so your so you know so I took commerce. I was afraid of math. I'm not afraid, but I don't right now, or like it's been some time when I made some peace with it, and I was like, okay, this is something interesting, and it's basically the truth in this. in the most weirded uh, language ever. Maths as a language is like language of truth. I don't know. It's just the plain. It's something. I don't know how. Maybe I'm just saying gibberish here. I don't understand. What I'm trying to say is it's something important. It's useful. Its world runs around in it, on it, and like regardless what you do, it's just there doing its job, making things functions how they should function. Right. But nobody told me that, so I have to come to my own realization eventually from many different sources. And now I'm like, okay, all right, it's interesting, and I could just go towards learning it if I have strong enough reason to apply it to something, but not yet. So yeah, I'm not scared of it, but I haven't overcome it, or I'm not gonna overcome it, but like I wanna get to an intermediate or whatever. So yeah, or just being able to apply that would be a bless. Uh, what was I lost track of what I'm trying to say? Totally lost track of what I'm trying to say. So yeah, like these games, these things, movies, animation, games, they communicate something that's very important, which leads us to continue our lives way beyond our what's the baseline, that is food, water, shelter, and something to pleasure ourselves. And I think that's the primary reason for me to get serious about things. So I started learning programming the most intuitively way possible, that seemed possible to me, that was creating web dev web dev stuff. Now it just felt right at the moment. It still feels right at the moment. And I was like, okay, this is the way to go, and I'm gonna do it. And I'm doing it. By the end of it, I want to be able to create a full stack application which is production ready, which could be used by people. And that's my goal, right? It can take a long while because I need to work through it somewhere, someplace. I don't know how much time it will take, but yeah, it will happen. And yeah, let's continue with it. It's important. It's these things are important. Um, Games are important. Learning ideas and the way you move towards them is rather important.
So that's what's fascinating to me here too, is that this is the kind of thing, this is representative of the kind of thing that advanced mathematicians do, right? Advanced mathematicians try to think about or visualize all kinds of strange spaces, or what things are constructed by particular configurations of mathematical rules. That is something that takes many years of study to get to the way that we teach it right now. But this game shows us that we can get there much more directly, at least to portions of that, right? And then maybe if we start building that educational structure, it will also reveal some neighboring portions that we don't even know are there. Oh, one more game. Mini Metro, right? This is a game about building a subway system. It is an extremely simplified and idealized subway system in a very idealized map of a city. And I wouldn't ever put this forth as a thing that would replace any kind of book that teaches you how to build a real subway system in real life, right? But that's not what it's trying to do. It is trying to capture the essence, right? The spirit of what this kind of transit system design is like in a very simplified way, in a very accessible way. But that's interesting on its own merit and fun, right? Like I have no plans to ever become a transit designer, but I can play Mini Metro and enjoy it because it's not really trying to be an educational game. At least I don't think so. I don't want to put words in the designer's mouth. But anyway, of these games that I've covered here, all four of these are just really good games in their own right. And they're games that I would use educationally. But really, that's not because somebody designed them to be part of a curriculum. It's because they found the value in the subject matter and found an effective way to communicate that value to the player. All right, so I want to show something that I've only shown a small number of people on a couple of occasions, which is my own attempt at making an educational game. I did this about 9 or 10 years ago. It was 2011 or 2010, and it was early in working on The Witness. I just had this little side project where I wanted to say, if I was doing an educational game, what would it be like? And well, we'll talk about that a bit. I do want to say this is not something that I've actively been working on, right? It's something I'm digging out of cold freeze from a long time ago. Well, and let's just look at it. And so that we get full screen, I'm going to turn the camera off for a second here. Bam. Oh, no, that's the wrong thing. Bam. All right. Don't turn off the actual screen. Okay, so this game was going to be maybe a sort of a knot tying game or something like that, where the things that you manipulate are all lines, and you can change the directions of the lines, right? So, well, and also their position sometimes. So I have this little handle, and I can drag this thing up and down, that drags this white line up and down with it. And then, this yellow line, I can't really control that one, just this white one with this red handle. But where they intersect, it makes a little interactive point here, and I can click on this, and it maybe twists the lines around each other. Maybe we would have a nice tying things together animation or something. When you work on video games, one of the things that you do like later on is make it look and feel nice and early. You just try to get the concepts down, and that's what I was doing here. So after I've tied these together, as I sort of move this line up and down, the point moves up and down as well. Now this particular level doesn't have much more to it than that, but of course we can start a second level that has more stuff, and suddenly we have a lot more choices about what we can do interactively, and we can try again what we did before. We can like twist these guys around each other this way and see what happens. But then it's like, okay, wait a minute. Usually these interaction points were on intersections, but I as the player can notice that like now there's one like between these. So what happens here? And you do this thing where you kind of make a new little white ribbon and tie it across these guys, and you can sort of start playing with it. Now the degree to which I made this game already, I was still experimenting with what the rules should be and how it should work, and so it doesn't have explicit goals yet. But the goals were going to be something like just try to get the line to go between some goalposts, out on the edge of the level somewhere. Or there might be additional things like, hey, to make a point, like, hey, how many times can you make this thing bounce back and forth as you have these things cross and change directions, right? Or try to make something that you've never seen before. Like maybe there's a goal of a certain type of thing landing up here, and you're like, what's that? And you realize, oh wait, I can click on this. That's different and interesting. I've never sort of done that, and then whoa, and then what's that, right? So you can explore as a player. You can explore and start to learn the system and start to see what these different kinds of interactions do with each other, right? And so now the punchline of this game is that it's supposed to be just an interesting game about this weird rule set of tying together knots and stuff, except the first thing to say is that can be very interesting in its own right, because when we go to make experimental video games with new designs, that's one of the main things we try to do, is try to find some set of gameplay mechanics that are different from what people have explored before, or to explore them in a different way, right? But the punchline to this is that toward the end of the game, it would be like, hey, now you know some stuff about particle physics, because all these things that you've been doing are actual particles from the real world. And that would just be a funny thing to do. And maybe someday I'll still make this game, but since that may not happen, I at least wanted to show it here. I guess some people were saying that I've shown this somewhere before, so maybe there's some other talk online where I show this too. Now again, it's worth pointing out that the subject matter that you would end up naturally exploring in a game like this is different from what you would do in the real world if you were trying to be explicitly educational, and you should allow it to be different in order to get the best game possible. So this thing that I showed with like lots of bounces, can I get more bounces? There we go. This thing that I showed with lots of bounces would correspond to a very low probability event if you were looking at actual Feynman diagrams or something, especially because this that we're looking at right now has one spatial dimension instead of three spatial dimensions like you would have in the actual world, right? And so
So, uh, as this amazing guy is saying, I forgot his name. Sorry. The abstraction, the the game itself isn't trying to explicitly teach you the specifics or even teach you the things that an educational game often tries to do, and that's why it's performing so good. Like our brain, whenever it makes a suggestion, idea, or relates something, it's often it relates it with an abstraction. It doesn't relate it with the specificity of the thing it's relating to. It's very much an abstraction, an idea, and um concept in a very conceptual way. It's trying to relate it to the other thing, right? And that's how we form learning. That's how we form an understanding of things. It's like you get it there and you just use it here, and you're just trying to understand it. You can later on find more distinction as you understand it more, and for getting started you try to understand this new thing, and you can just relate it lightly from that one thing that you learned earlier, and then you can explore it and figure it out that this other thing is entirely a new thing in itself. That happens. That's how learning is working here, and that's how learning often works in real life. Yeah.
this type of situation is much easier to create in a little game universe and much easier to gravitate toward, which makes it different from what you would do in a serious study of these phenomena. But that's okay, because what you're doing is you're building familiarity and you're building intuition, and you're just making a fun game that gets people excited about the subject and wanting to know more, right? And so you should allow it to be different. You should allow it to be whatever makes a game good. All right, let's get back to the slides. This is a note to myself, which I remembered, thank you, but it's always good to have a note. All right, so what I am talking about here is about harnessing this ability of games to communicate in this subtle way. That is not the way that games have usually been applied to education, and it's not the kind of thing that people usually do when they think about applying games to education, right? There's this term that was concocted sometime around 2010 called gamification, and people think that this is the kind of thing that you use to get people interested. And this term annoys me so much. I'm going to try to explain why. I've shown this graph here of interest because I sort of thought that this was something that spiked around the early 2010s and went away, kind of, but it apparently hasn't gone away. I guess lots of people in education still think about this. Really, a lot of people making bad websites where they want to like keep you glued to their bad website think about this. And yeah, it's weird. I don't know why people like gamification so much in Utah, but apparently gamification is big in Utah. Well, what is it? Well, it's this idea that you can use some of these elements from games like achievements or badges or other kinds of rewards, and you can use those to motivate people and get them to do the things that you want them to do that are otherwise not that fun, I guess, or that they wouldn't otherwise do. And, well, I think this is really bad for a lot of reasons. Let me try to explain. First of all, this stuff didn't come from games, right? This kind of thing about giving out achievements and badges.
Right. So this is the thing, right, where there are levels and it's like a game, slot machine, social media. You can relate it, right? It's a familiar term, gamification of shits. So it's obviously an very large imitation of trying to do it, but things that these lack is they don't understand that these achievements, likes, grades, all of that stuff is just indicating something to the player of the game. So they only gamify a certain part of the whatever they are building, trying to do, or you know, they didn't gamify the concept itself. So the gamification shit, they can only gamify the variables they have available, and they can't gamify the entirety of what they are trying to communicate with whatever the game, education game they are trying to create. So, and often these things are very simple. So what they will do is they will put up a leaderboard. That's the first thing they do. They put up systems, labels, rewards. They all gamify this thing, right? Even when you think about a game like a PUBG or something, any game of that sort, there are levels to it. There are like something, something, something. But also when you take all that away, when you are in the game, there are no levels. There is just the game. Levels come after and before you go into the arena, right? All those infographics and all those stuff, while you are in the game, there are just mechanisms and things that you are doing to play that game and move forward in your gaming gaming map, gaming journey. You're trying to win it in the end. So so you're trying to play the game for winning it and itself. So yeah, so you get what I'm not able to articulate it much finely, but it's like partial gamification of the things that only gamification of the variables that they can only see, and they didn't know. And the part they don't know, there are other variables that you can gamify, is that there aren't. If you want to gamify those variables, you have to invent them, because again, all the variables that they are trying to gamify is just very abstractions of a real world classroom scenario, like putting up leaderboard results and all that stuff. So very relative variables, not the actual thing in it. It's like before and after, not the thing. And i I don't have any idea how to articulate this. I'm sorry, but I kind of understand it for me, and since I am the only one here, it works. Let's move on. Oh, fuck. My water is over. I'm gonna get it. Wait.
and rewards has been around for hundreds or thousands of years by people who did it better than video games have done it, right? If you're in the military and you get a medal, you probably did something really serious to get that medal, and the military knows that. They don't give them to everyone, right? They know that the reason that you get respect for having a medal, the reason the medals are valuable is that they don't give them to everyone, right? They give them to people who earn them. If you get a medal in a video game or on a website, it's like, it means that you at least were able to breathe through your mouth long enough to stay alive to get the medal, but it doesn't mean much more than that, right? And so these are things, first of all, that have been done better in other places. And not just militaries, like you have organizations like the Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts, I don't know, this is Boy Scouts, copying that, right? You have, airlines have been doing this forever, where you like get frequent flyer miles and level up. All of this came before this gamification trend. So why are people saying this came from games when games like actually added it later, right? The things that are true to games have been around since, well, video games especially, have been around since Pac-Man or before, whereas this thing is actually something we got from other places and did badly. So gamification is weird. And you know who else does all this stuff in addition to, like, airlines, grocery stores, armies, and whoever? Schools have already been doing this for a long time. And so if your plan about how to improve education is we're going to bring gamification to schools, they've already been doing this forever, and they're better at it than you. So what are you talking about? This isn't going to solve anything, right? It's just a bunch of I don't know what it is. It's the product of people who are not thinking very carefully about what is going on. And so, schools are already full of this kind of thing and have been for a long time. And you know what? A lot of kids have trouble being engaged. Schools are boring a lot of the time, right? So maybe instead of calling this stuff gamification, we should call it schoolification, first of all. So why would you schoolify your games? And then why would you schoolify your schools? Like, we're trying to bring schools into the future. If you have a problem, so here's the thing. The reason that actual video games, not this weird layer of rewards and badges that we pasted on top, but the reason that actual video games are enjoyable and that people like them is because human beings have a drive to explore, they have a drive to learn, they have a drive to get better at things, right? And games, when they are doing well, hook into that in a deep way, in a significant way that lets them learn things and lets them become better at things, right? Somehow, so this technological advancement that we've performed that gave us all this great writing and language that has allowed us to do things, we never completely got mastery of it in terms of when it came to teaching it. So we have all these schools where people are, even though they're supposed to be learning, they're not like engaged in learning, they're not enjoying learning. This drive of the human to learn is not kicking in those environments, right? And so that's the problem, right? The fact that this kid is like asleep in class is the problem. And if you have a problem like that, like if the boards in your house are like the wood is rotting, you need to replace the wood, right? You don't paint over it and say, oh, it's better, right? So if school is like this, you need to re-envision the school so that people's natural desire to learn is engaged. You don't want to put a bunch of fake stuff over the top to try to trick them into engaging with the material, right? So when a game like this adds all these layers of like, oh, you're level 55 and only 100 more experience points to level 56, and you have this many of this points and this many of these other points and this many trillion banana points, like, this is the boring part of what we do. People don't play these games because of this stuff. Now, speaking of matters of cynical manipulation of human beings, I do think these things are effective to some degree in getting people to behave in a certain way. But this comes at a cost, all right? It comes at the cost that people know that they are being manipulated, all right? And it comes at an opportunity cost. So let me talk about that. Oh, wait, actually, let me talk about this. So Alfie Kohn has this book called Punished by Rewards, wherein he presents a very interesting viewpoint about how these kinds of reward systems can actually be very demotivating, right? And do more damage than good, and actually do very serious damage. This book was written a long time before this whole gamification thing happened. That's how long this kind of stuff has been going on in schools. I don't know, maybe hundreds of years. I don't know what education was like a couple hundred years ago, but he makes a very good case. Now, I can summarize it. You should read the book, but I can summarize it by saying that human beings are cognitively sophisticated, right? We know how to read what's going on. So if you're going to bribe somebody, like if you're going to bribe me to study a subject, right? If you're going to bribe me to pretend I'm interested in a subject, I know that it's probably not that interesting without the bribe, right? I know that I need to be bribed in order to do the thing, so I know that it's probably not something that I should be wanting to do, right? Or if I'm performing some activity, well, we'll just say the other thing that happens in these scenarios is you shift why students or just whoever is doing the behavior, right? You change the reason why they're doing things, right? If you want to train really good scientists, you need people who are interested in science, who really like the idea of being good at science, who have positive mental and psychological associations with science and the way science is done. And if you try to bribe them to get through the science track instead, you're changing what happens in their mind, right? And you're raising people who are trying to get the rewards and not actually trying to get the learning. And so, I don't know, I didn't just do a very good explanation of this. Maybe I'll try to do it again at the end, and we'll cut that into the video, but it's a book you should read if you're interested in these things. So, the other thing I have to say about gamification is it doesn't mean anything. I've spent most of this talk talking about the way that games can convey information, the way that they can communicate. And when you say you're doing gamification, that's not the part of games that you're using. You're using just this part that's a carrot on a stick tied to the donkey, right? To keep the donkey going forward. And that like doesn't mean anything, except of course because people are cognitively sophisticated. It means that they're being manipulated and they know they're being manipulated, right? But it doesn't mean anything besides that. And so you're kind of paying an opportunity cost where you're taking this channel that could be a serious conveyor of deep and interesting meaning, and you're turning it into something that's doing something else. And so you're losing that channel, all right? Now, I've described games as being complex systems several times in this talk, and I think that one of the things that games can do is help you develop systems thinking. Let's talk about what that is for a second, right? So some of the subjects that we want to teach are about complex systems. So for example, if you want to learn economics, right now the way you do it is by reading a whole bunch of books that make assertions about how economic systems will behave in certain scenarios when certain forces are applied or certain constraints are applied, right? That's the same kind of thing that we learn in games, except we learn it a lot more directly and intuitively, right? So economics is an example of a study that is fundamentally about how systems behave, and we're teaching it in this way that we've said is maybe not that good. It takes you a long time to start to get to the intuition that you would have of a system, whereas maybe a game can take you more directly to that intuition, right? And systems are becoming more and more important because, as our technological power increases, our ability to shape the world has increased, and, well, we don't necessarily have complete grasp over all our systems right now, whether they're environmental systems, political systems, economic systems, or even just technological. Like, we have this huge system of technological research and production that I don't think that we're managing very efficiently or very well right now. So systems literacy is becoming something of an emergency. It's important in a way that it's never been in the past. And so we need to develop systems literacy society-wide, right? We need to train people in systems thinking. And the way to do that is by engaging with systems, right? And so I think you could do way worse than to have people play a lot of video games, to put it frankly, at least the systemic kind. Now, there are certain kinds of video games that are not about systems. For example, linear story games or any kind of game that's like a linear sequence from one piece to another that doesn't give you really much choice about how things play out, or where the way things play out is controlled by if statements as opposed to systemic interactions, right? And a decade or two ago, I used to think that I was a little bit in the minority because I valued the systems part of games, and I didn't really like these games that were pretending to be movies and being all linear and stuff. And because those seem to be the biggest money-making games at the time, all these AAA console games. The thing that's happened though is the biggest games in the world are these system games now. Stuff like Fortnite, right? Fortnite is not a linear story-based game. It's a complex system game, like PUBG, like I was talking about before, but maybe more chaotic than that. But so, if you take people who play one game and observe that system very carefully and intensely for a while, and play another game and observe that system, and play another game and observe that system, we can get to this kind of meta-knowledge of systems where you kind of understand how systems can behave, and you respect systems, and you have a feel for things that may happen. And that's very important, right? Because then, when you're in some novel system, whether it's an economic system or something else, you can get a little tingling of your spider sense, right? You can be like, oh, I don't like what I'm looking at here because this reminds me of these other times when I saw very nonlinear, surprising responses to inputs. I don't want to provoke that here. And there's a very big difference between reading about surprise nonlinear responses to inputs a few times until hopefully you've been told and will remember that. There's a big difference between that and experiencing it a few times and like being burned hard once or twice in fictional universes by this thing, right? You'll carry a different respect for it and a different understanding. And so there's this meta-system awareness that that certain people who have played a lot of games have, that we could be giving to a lot more people, and we aren't. And that is a shame because it's a waste. We have this capability that we need and that we are not deploying. Now, whenever I have a talk and I say a bunch of idealistic things about games like this, people are always like, oh, there's problems with what you're saying, blah, blah, blah. And yes, there are. I want to confront a few. Problem number one is that realistically, the educational system will never go for what I am talking about. Oh, that's, let me move my picture. Oops, not that. No. The real problem is that computers are terrible. Okay, so problem number one is that what I have described is, if you take it to its logical extension, it's very unconventional. I'm saying, hey, you need to understand that games have a certain way of communicating. You need to respect what that way is. You need to respect what it's good at and what it's not good at. And you need to look for the things that it's good at, which, by the way, will not necessarily interact heavily with what we are currently teaching and will nevertheless be very valuable, right? Now, the problem with that is we have huge systems, both in my country and around the world, that are very invested in propagating the kind of system that we already have, in part because people know what works to the extent that it works, and I'm saying we should go do something that is not known to work at all, and that's all seems irresponsible, especially if people look like they're having fun while they're doing these things. And of course, the second reason is that large organizations always part of their job becomes survival and self-perpetuation because that's why they still exist, right? And so the traditional educational system is not really going to go for the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Fortunately, due to the technology of the internet, we maybe don't have to worry about that much. Because what I've been saying is that these games should be enjoyable on their own, regardless of the supposed educational content. And so if a game is a fun game, people might just want to download it over Steam or the Epic Store or somewhere, right? And if we start doing this successfully in a number of cases, enough that you can look at this and see that a non-traditional kind of education is happening by putting all these individual pieces together, then maybe at some point traditional education starts looking like cable TV from the 80s or 90s, where people had to buy all these bundles of cable TV channels, and they're like, I don't want to pay for all these. I just want these ones over here, the good ones. Of course, now nobody watches cable TV and everybody watches YouTube. So problem number two, what about the signaling that people get from school? A lot of people go to universities, or high school even, really, for the social status and not for the actual learning. And I don't think we should try to solve this problem right now. Firstly, because I think it's more important that we determine actually what games are good at and how we can use them. And that should come before trying to build a full educational system out of those things anyway, or something that would replace anything. But secondly, I don't think these are the people that we should worry about, right? So I mentioned before that I went to a top computer science school. I did not actually graduate with a computer science degree. I was very close to graduating. I only had about one semester of classes left to take, and I just left because I couldn't take it being in school anymore. Like, I was depressed being in school. I felt like I was dying inside being in school, and that I would be much better outside of school. Now, I lasted till my last year of college, but a lot of people don't, right? Our current system is not serving a lot of people very well. Many of those people are very smart and very industrious, and they just don't fit into the thing that we have. And so I think you could do quite well just by looking for and addressing those people with this new kind of educational game, and worrying about the traditional system a little later on. It might honestly fall apart on its own at some point. And maybe the real deepest problem is it's really hard to make these games. Like we said, most educational games are bad. What do we do about that? How do we make them good? Well, A, pay attention to the issues I was talking about. But B, we're sort of at the hardest point of trying to attack this problem right now because we don't have a tradition of people who are building the knowledge of how you do educational games well, of what kinds of things work, of what don't. We don't have that many examples of things that work that you can draw on when you're doing something new. And once you have a tradition of practice, it has a kind of momentum of its own that can help you make headway and solve problems. Now, it's not easy to build a whole tradition of people, especially because we're starting at zero. And I literally mean zero. The stuff that I'm talking about how to use games here is sufficiently different enough from what's actually happening that I'm not aware of anyone in the world who is actually doing this seriously full-time. Not even me, right? I've dabbled in some of this stuff, but I'm working on other stuff right now, right? And these authors of these other games are they're making games that, like I've said, have a great deal of educational merit, but they're not making it with the eye of building this kind of tradition and this kind of institution. And so we need to get maybe some people started on that. And then it'll take a long time. Like, you have to build the building brick by brick. But there are at least some easy places to start. There's some low-hanging fruit. There are some subjects that might be easier to teach than others, right? Or some subjects that seem more amenable at first to communication via games than others. So anyway, to recap. What have we said about games? They convey their own kind of information that is different from the kind that comes through other media. They're very good at imparting intuition, maybe not so good at imparting concrete numbers, but maybe that's actually fine and good. They teach you how to think your way through problems because they're interactive and you have to decide what to do on the spot. They teach a kind of empirical validation that is kind of like science. They allow for freedom of inquiry because, again, we didn't really cover this, but again, because they're interactive and systemic games tend to be nonlinear, you can decide which part of the system to go do right now. I don't think you should try to replace books with games. I think you should augment an educational system by using games with books, and probably use games first or earlier, because you get to intuition that is very hard to get to in a traditional way. So if any of this sounds unconvincing to you or like something you can't take action on, then I would just like to say, like, well, that's because it's really early, because we're not using games in this way right now. And when we haven't done something yet at all, especially if it's actually a new technology, nobody knows what it looks like, and we don't have the example to draw from. We don't know what it's going to feel like when it's actually a thing, right? And so because it's the future, it's hard to see by definition, right? I do think that we can end up with a system of education that is much more effective than what we have right now, much more engaging, much more thorough in some aspects, and that is not cynical in the way that gamification wants us to be, or the way that these school rewards want us to be. But I do think that that's in the future. And I called this video games in the future of education, right? I didn't call this talk video games in the present of education. And the reason is because it isn't very easy to see the things that I'm talking about. And so I would encourage you to think about it really hard. Maybe not really hard, but really thoroughly, or with good energy and good motivation.
Yeah, that was it. Like, we get the gist of it, and yeah, amazing talk. Amazing talk. Great video. Nice. Well, that is done, and I'm a little bit refreshed and relieved. What is next? What am I going to do next? such a question. Nah. I think I will end this stream. Why I will end this stream? I don't know. But I think I started the stream with something. Maybe find a better question. Find a something better. Maybe some direction. Anything. And I'm leaving with something. And we will see each other next time when we see each other. And about learning and revising the DOM primitives, Express server, and working on the JS, working on the site. Eventually, we will do that too. It's inevitable. Alright. Peace.